You're listening to Get Your Marriage On, the fun and spicy podcast bringing you new tools and fresh ideas so that you can be the sexiest couple you know.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Not only is today Wednesday, or some people call it as Hump Day, today is also June 9th, International Lovemaking Day. And today we have a very special guest, Carlie Palmer-Webb. She's a sex researcher and amazing person when it comes to a really positive view on sexuality. We're going to talk about sexual agency and how having more of it in your marriage will increase the passion and connection in your relationship. This is episode 33, Sexual Agency. Carlie, I'm so happy to have you on the podcast today. Nice to have you on.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
So life must be pretty amazing to be a sex researcher and a gender researcher. This is like what you get to do all day and talk.
Yeah, I love it. Can't complain.
That's so cool. I want to know, like, as you've worked with many people, this is really something you've really studied in depth in your research, and you've probably formed probably more than the average person. What's your views on sex, and how has that shaped like your research and everything you've done?
Mm-hmm. My views on sex, that's a big question, Dan, but I would say I think sex is wonderful. I think it can be one of the greatest parts of life if we do it right. I believe that sex is a gift to us given from God. Our sexuality is a gift from God. And when we practice that in the right space, in the right time, and in the right way, I think it can just be the best thing ever.
As you've done your research, have you learned like that a person's sexuality is kind of unique, like one's personality is, and other attributes about themselves, person to person?
Oh yeah. There's so much variation in people's sexuality and everything that goes along with that. I think because of messages we get in the media, we expect ourselves to fit into some sort of mold of sexuality, but that's just not reality. All of us are very unique in that regard.
And that's not that helpful to try to fit a mold, is it?
No. In any area of life, no, but in sexuality, definitely not.
So I can imagine as two people come together in a marriage, there's going to be differences just in sexual preferences and behaviors and things like that.
I have yet to meet a couple who aligns perfectly as far as sexual desires, sex drive, anything like that. There's always a discrepancy.
And so we need to honor each other's differences, I'm assuming. And that sometimes gets us in trouble.
Mm-hmm. It can be challenging sometimes.
And I saw this on your Instagram, something called sexual agency. And I think that ties into what we're talking about today. Can you define what sexual agency is and how we need to be aware of it in our marriages?
Definitely. Sexual agency is the idea that every person gets to choose how, when, and with whom they engage sexually. So we kind of understand this concept outside of marriage. We know that we need consent before we engage in any type of physical behavior with people when we're dating. But we don't often remember that sexual agency is something that we always have, regardless of marital status or relationship status. Within marriage, sexual agency is just as important as it is outside of marriage. And it requires that we respect that our spouse's body is their own. It belongs to them, and they get to choose how they engage with us sexually, and vice versa.
So what does a relationship look like when there's high sexual agency compared to a relationship with lower sexual agency?
Mm-hmm. Well, if there's lower sexual agency, meaning I think what you're saying is a relationship where sexual agency isn't being respected. Is that right?
Yes.
So if that's happening, then there's likely some manipulation going on, some coercion, trying to convince your spouse to do things sexually that you want them to do that they don't want to do. Forcing or coercing your partner into having sex more often than they want to. Of course, there will be conversations about this, right? And you're not going to line up always. So there will be some discussions, some trying to find middle ground. But if there's any coercion, any force, any guilt tripping, if they don't give you what you want, that's where sexual agency is not being respected.
On the other hand, when there's a lot of respect, how does that play out in a marriage?
Yeah. When there is a lot of respect for sexual agency, we respect the no's of our spouse sexually. So if our spouse doesn't want to have sex when we want to have sex, we respect that and we don't force them to. We don't guilt trip them for not having sex with us, etc. When they don't want to have sex the way we want to, or they don't want to try something new, we respect their no, and they respect ours at the same time. So, for example, I got a message recently asking, there was a man who was saying, I really enjoy oral sex. I'm willing to do it for my wife, but she's not willing to do it for me. What do I do? And I understand that situation can be frustrating when you're really excited to try something, you think it would be really pleasurable, you want to do it, and your spouse doesn't. But that being said, my response to him and my response to everyone in these kinds of situations is that you need to respect her no. If she's not comfortable with oral sex, then she shouldn't have to do it ever. That's just how it is if we're respecting sexual agency.
Gotcha. That could be hard to hear for some people.
Yeah, definitely.
Isn't that part of human development and growing up a bit?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's natural for us to think in transactions in a way, even in relationships where we adore the person, we care so much about their well-being. It's natural for us to think like, oh, I did the dishes last time. Is he going to do the dishes this time? Or, in the case of sex, like, I'm willing to perform oral sex on her. Doesn't she then need to perform oral sex on me? But that transaction mentality within a sexual relationship keeps us from respecting sexual agency. So if we notice ourselves thinking in transactions, time spent or acts performed or anything like that, then we need to refocus on loving our spouse and caring about their experience just as much as we care about ours.
If you tried to, like, as you said earlier, manipulate, coerce, trick, cajole your spouse into finally giving in, what does that end up doing long-term for the passion in the relationship?
Oh, it's a disaster. There's nothing that will kill your spouse's sex drive so quickly as feeling like they have no choice. Duty sex is not sexy. Having sex because you think you have to, or because your spouse will mistreat you if you don't, those kinds of things bring out the worst in people, but they definitely bring out the worst in a sexual relationship. It's not the way to build the type of sexual relationship that all of us want.
So if you're that husband that wanted to, have some more reciprocation in the oral sex department in the relationship and isn't getting it, and the answer of no seems hard at first, what are some specific steps he can take or she can take so that, to honor each other's sexual agency and still keep passion alive in the relationship?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great question. The first thing I would say is to do a little self-evaluation and try to figure out why that thing seems really appealing to you. Is it the novelty? Is it that you think it will make you feel really close to your partner? Does it just seem exciting because, it's something new and it seems really sexy? And then once you identify why that's something that you want, then you can talk with your partner about things that they might feel comfortable doing that will allow you to experience something similar. So if you're really excited about oral sex because you've never had someone perform oral sex on you and the novelty is really exciting, but your spouse isn't comfortable with oral sex, then talk about other things that you might be able to introduce into your sexual relationship that would fill the desire for novelty. Try other things that are new and that feel really sexy to you, but that your spouse feels comfortable with.
Great. And for the record, is novelty seeking okay in a relationship?
Oh, heck yeah.
Tell us more about that.
Well, I think in every area of our lives, we like to experience excitement. Some of us are more comfortable with change than others. But we like things to be new and fresh. We like to try new foods. We like to travel to new places, you know. We don't want to stay, this is maybe my generation speaking, but we don't want to stay in a specific job for too long because we want to experience different things. The same is true in sex. It doesn't mean that something's wrong in your sexual relationship if you want to try new things. It's a way that you can learn together and introduce some excitement into your relationship, change things up. I think seeking novelty is a good way to keep the passion alive in a long-term marriage. Yeah. Of course, like anything, if novelty is the goal and all you want is novelty and you're not focusing on the connection that you're experiencing with your spouse, it can become a problem. But for most couples, that's not an issue.
Very good. How do you deal with just finding more connection then during sex?
Emotional connection?
Yes.
That's a great question. This is something that I get asked quite a bit. And I think there are so many different things that contribute to the emotional connection that you experience during sex. But let me point out just a couple. The first thing that I think we need to recognize as far as emotional connection goes is that the emotional connection we experience outside of the bedroom is going to carry over into the emotional connection that we experience in the bedroom. So if you're not treating each other well, you're not expressing and feeling love when you're not having sex, it will be difficult to experience that when you are. So
it's not distinct, right? You're the same people. Right. It's not like
definitely
you flip a switch when you enter the bedroom.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. It comes with you into the bedroom. So the first thing I would say is focus on your emotional connection outside of the bedroom. Okay. Find ways to take care of each other, to help each other to feel loved. Learn how your partner feels connected to you outside the bedroom, and that will help. The other thing that I would say is that how much you care about your partner's experience during sex is really obvious. And that plays a big role in whether or not they're feeling loved by you. So I think that it's totally appropriate for both partners to invest in their own pleasure, meaning to care about their own pleasure, to allow time to be spent on their pleasure, but they should also both be investing in their spouse's pleasure. And you don't need to think about equal time or anything like that, as I mentioned before, but you should be equally invested in each other's experience, and that will also help with the emotional connection. Some cuddling after sex, a little bit of words of affirmation after sex, that can help as well.
Awesome. That's good. So I think if you're in a normal marriage, you'll have difficulties around sex.
Yeah.
Whether it's a little bit or a lot,
right.
That's congratulations, you're normal.
Right. I think every marriage has some difficulty around sex.
Right. And I believe that those difficulties are actually help us they kind of refine us. It's like a refining process, help us kind of grow up a little bit, become better. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. As you talk to couples and research and work on these things, any tips on how you can exercise more like self-compassion or empathy when your spouse is having difficulties about sex, or starting to change in the way that,
Yeah.
like, you've talked in the past about how sexual desire patterns, like, they shift sometimes in
Yeah.
marriage. The low desire partner, now you're the higher, or the other way around, or things that used to excite you don't excite you anymore. How
Hmm.
do we navigate those things with compassion?
Yeah. I would say it's important for all of us to understand that change is inevitable in our sex life. So we should expect things to change. We should expect desire to change. We should expect the things that arouse us to change. We should expect sexual frequency to change. We should expect our partner's body to change.
Mhm.
If we have that expectation, then when the changes happen, it doesn't feel as jarring. The other thing I would say is, in order to really practice compassion in our sexual relationships, we need to recognize that there is never a more vulnerable situation than sex.
Right.
So when our spouse is having sex with us, they are completely bare, literally and figuratively. You have more power to love them in that setting than any other setting, and you have more power to hurt them in that setting than any other setting, if that makes sense, because it's so incredibly vulnerable.
Right.
And I think paying attention to that vulnerability helps us to develop compassion. If we can see how much our spouse is giving, how much they're willing to share with us, how, especially for new couples, how scary this might be or intimidating as they start their sex life together. If we can see that vulnerability, then the compassion comes more easily.
Love it. I love that. And when you have more compassion, of course, sex is going to be more enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a place to retreat to, don't you think?
Yes, yes, absolutely. For a lot of couples, sex right now feels like a job. It feels like a chore that they have to do. And I mean, on average, we know that women are the lower desire partner, but there are a lot of marriages in which the woman is actually the higher desire partner. So we see this happening to both men and women, that they feel like sex is kind of a chore. It's something that makes them tired thinking about instead of energizes them. But with the right tools, and as we're working towards being compassionate towards our spouse, sex will become something that fills us, that helps us to feel loved, that helps us to feel excited about our marriage, not something that feels like a chore.
Speaking of feeling like a chore, some of the higher desire spouses I hear complain that the lower desire spouses, like, they're the gatekeeper for sex. They're the ones that control the amount of sex they have in the relationship, and
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of frustrating.
Yeah.
But how do you navigate that with respect to what we're talking about today with sexual agency?
Mm-hmm. I understand why it feels like that. And in a lot of ways, they're not wrong, right? Because if we're respecting sexual agency, we should never force our spouse to have sex, right? So in some ways, it does feel like they're the gatekeeper. But the truth is, both the higher and the lower desire partner need to be willing to compromise. It's not that you have to have sex if you're the lower desire partner out of duty. It's just an opportunity to love your spouse and offer them something that's important to them more often than you might want naturally. So I try to counsel couples to find a middle ground where the higher desire partner doesn't feel neglected and the lower desire partner doesn't feel coerced or pushed into something that they don't want. That type of relationship puts more power into the hands of the couple instead of exclusively in the hands of the lower desire partner.
Because you're working together as an intimate team to create a marriage you both want, rather than
Definitely.
one person having to say.
Definitely.
Can we talk about responsive desire versus spontaneous desire in the context of sexual agency too?
Yes, absolutely. I love talking about this.
Let's define those two real quick and talk
Okay.
about what typical responsive patterns look like for
Mm-hmm.
the higher desire, more spontaneous type people listening, so they know
Yeah,
how to like navigate that better and with more compassion in their relationship.
definitely. I think this is actually one of the most important pieces of information as we try to find balance between a higher desire and a lower desire partner. So spontaneous desire, as you can probably guess, is when a person experiences sexual desire throughout the day. They'll randomly have a thought that they want to have sex. They'll start to feel a little bit of arousal when they think about sex. Someone who experiences responsive desire is someone who experiences arousal before the desire for sex. So oftentimes people who feel like they don't really have a sex drive or they have a very low sex drive, it's not that they're not experiencing desire, it's just that they're experiencing a different type. So they need some physical arousal before sex sounds appealing to them, which means that for lower desire partners, they might need to be open to exploring some sort of physical touch to see if the desire for sex emerges. And that can feel kind of vulnerable to them. It can also feel hard for the higher desire partner because what if you start making out with your spouse and then they don't want to have sex and you're already aroused? That's kind of uncomfortable. I
Uh-huh.
get that. But
And that's when you learn to just enjoy arousal for arousal's sake. It
yes,
doesn't have to
yes.
be anything.
I love
Right.
that. Absolutely. But that exploration, figuring out what type of desire you experience and experimenting with your desire can help you find the balance that we talked about so that the higher desire partner doesn't feel neglected and the lower desire partner doesn't feel forced.
So before I understood about the whole responsive and spontaneous desire thing, I remember one particular day, my wife and I, we had a great sexual encounter. And the next day, I was just thinking about it and how wonderful it was and how much I desire something like that again. And I mentioned to my wife, don't you walk around all day like I do, just like craving me as much as I crave you? And she's like, no. And I was like, floored, like, what's wrong with you? But nothing was wrong with her. She's perfectly normal. She just experiences more responsive desire most of the time than I do.
Yes, absolutely. I love that example. It's something that a lot of couples experience, and it can be kind of shocking when you realize that your spouse doesn't think about sex as much as you do.
Right. But they're perfectly normal. And that's part of that sexual agency and respecting that for who they
Yes,
are.
definitely. Definitely.
Very good. We talked about connecting better emotionally. Can we talk about how to connect better physically? Like, how can we improve the physical pleasure we experience in sex?
Yes, I think the most important way to do that is to really understand the sexual functioning of your partner. So you should be an expert. If you have a female partner, you should be an expert on the female body and female sexual functioning. If you have a male partner, you should be an expert on the male body and male sexual functioning. Obviously, it's helpful to really understand your own body and sexual functioning as well. But that's a key part. A lot of the couples that I speak to that are having a really difficult time making sex pleasurable for both individuals, they don't know very much about what feels pleasurable to their spouse. They don't understand their genitalia or different parts of their bodies that are really sensitive. And without that information, then it's just, you're just it's just experimenting with zero knowledge. So understanding that is an important part of pleasing each other physically.
That's great. I I remember early on in our marriage when we were first learning about sexuality and learning how we can just through the growth that we went through, realizing that intercourse isn't the way my wife and I guess the majority of women experience orgasm. So that was something I wish people told me earlier on too.
Yeah, same. No, it's a common misconception that intercourse is the most pleasurable act for men and women. But the truth is, we each have a incredibly sensitive sexual organ. For the men, it's penis. For the penis. For the women, it's the clitoris. And the clitoris isn't typically, there's not a lot of sensation on the clitoris during intercourse. For some women, because the clitoris wraps around the vagina, so there's some stimulation of the clitoris internally. For some women, that's sufficient for orgasm. But for most women, about 75%, intercourse won't help them to reach orgasm.
Gotcha. So you need to learn how to understand your wife's or your husband's sexual functioning better.
Yes, definitely.
What if, in order for you to teach someone though, do you need to understand your own functioning well too?
I think so. I think it's helpful for you to both be the expert on both. But we shouldn't expect our spouse to teach us everything we know about their sexual functioning, because they're learning too. So we should seek out other resources where we can both be learning about each other's sexual functioning.
Right. Like the Intimately Us app, for instance.
Yes. I've been exploring that and I'm really liking it so far. So good work. Very
good. Great. So this episode is airing on June 9th, which is International Lovemaking Day. We're super excited about this day. Not only is today a Wednesday, hump day, it's also like the birthday of the Intimately Us app. So if you're listening to this, we have a little extra gift for you today in the app. You can go log in and check it out. But that being said, it being International Lovemaking Day, Carlie, what are some of your black belt sex tips? Like, let's say you're a couple, you've been married a while, and you're relating really well together, you're honoring each other's sexual agency, and now you're ready to take things like to the next level. What are 2 or 3 like black belt tips you can offer?
I love it. This might seem kind of simple, but I think one of the easiest and most effective ways to improve your sex life is to ask your spouse what things are really appealing to you that we haven't done before, that we haven't done for a while. What's something that you really want to do in the bedroom? And that can be something that's pretty vulnerable to share. So unless asked, it might not ever come up. So ask your spouse what you can do to improve their sexual experience. Simple, but still one of the best things I think you can do to improve your sexual relationship. Another thing I would say is don't be afraid to explore. And I'm not just talking about exploring with each other in the bedroom. I'm also talking about finding quality resources to learn about how to improve your sex life. Oftentimes as Christians, we are scared to do research because we don't know what we're going to find and we don't know if it will align with our values. And that's a totally valid fear, but there are so many resources now that are provided by, people in your same denomination or Christians in general, people with your same values that are really, really good. So be willing to explore different resources, be willing to explore new things as far as you're comfortable.
Great. Any other great tips?
Oh, goodness. We could talk about this all night long. I think that this can kind of be a sensitive one for couples for whom this has been really difficult. This goal can seem discouraging. But one of my sex tips is to pursue a sexual relationship where both partners orgasm regularly. It doesn't have to be a situation in which both partners orgasm every time, But
Or simultaneously, for that matter.
oh yeah, simultaneous orgasm almost never happens.
Uh,
Thanks for nothing, Hollywood. But yeah, I would focus on pursuing a sexual relationship where it's equally pleasurable, which means that both spouses are able to climax. That is especially difficult for women. Learning how to orgasm is more challenging for women on average than it is for men. But research has yet to identify women who are not capable of orgasm. There's nothing wrong with your body if you're having a difficult time getting there. It's just going to take some time to learn about it. So I would say really dedicate yourself, both of you, to learning about the woman's orgasm and pursuing that. It will make your sex life so much better. And not only will it make it more enjoyable for her, but it will also make her want sex more, which is very appealing to most husbands, right? One of the reasons why they're not stoked about having sex as much as you want it is because sex isn't as good for them yet. That's not always the case, right? There's still responsive desire, even if sex is really good. But improving the experience that she's having is a really good way to help her want sex more often.
Anything else you want to share today?
I think the last thing I would say, Dan, is just I want to encourage couples not to give up on the sexual relationship that they hope for. I know that it takes work and time and effort. And I also know that all of us are just somehow tired all the time. I know that life is crazy and this can feel like something else to add to your plate, something else to think about and spend time on. But this can be one of the most meaningful parts of your relationship. It can be so, so good. So I just want to encourage the couples who are feeling really discouraged in their sexual relationship right now. It doesn't always need to be the way that it is now. And there's so much hope for a meaningful and mutually pleasurable sexual relationship. So keep trying. There's so much room for improvement and it can get so much better.
That's awesome. Thank you. If people want to find you, what's the best way to find you?
You can reach out to me on Instagram. My name's Carlie Palmer-Webb on Instagram, or you can search the Christian Sex Educator and you can find me on Instagram that way as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We hope that you enjoyed this episode of Get Your Marriage On. And if you did, we would love it if you would take a few seconds to give us a rating on iTunes and to share the show with your friends. They'll thank you for life. Once you've done that, you can head over to getyourmarriageon.com for more resources about today's topic and to download our amazing marriage apps. Now go get your marriage on.